Mick Jagger's ex-wife calls for a return of the traditional Latin Mass. And Andy Warhol and Sting both resented the advent of the new Mass. Plus, I attend my very first gathering rite. All that and so much more tonight on the Remnant Underground. Happy New Year, friends. Michael Matt down here in the catacombs where, incidentally, I intend to remain for most of 2017. Rob, what's going to happen this year?
I don't know.
There's a lot in the works. It's going to be a real corker. Just kind of hoping the old catacomb down here is apocalypse-proof, just in case, because things are doing good. Things are looking up in a way, and things are looking rather apocalyptic. So I guess we're going to wait and see. To kick off the end of 2016, I dropped into one of our local Catholic churches here in St. Paul on Christmas Eve, and for the first time in my life, I experienced the neo-Catholic Gathering Rite, Rob.
It sounds wicked or something.
Yeah, you heard of these?
No.
The Gathering Rite. It was really fun. I felt like Ebenezer Scrooge, with the Ghost of Christmas Future. I guess this is what the church is going to look like in the future, and it was really, really strange. In fact, I was so shocked that I whipped out my phone and I was just walking around the church filming my co-religionists in action. Didn't quite manage to catch what initially had caught my eye, which was some youngsters up in the St. Joseph's altar, on the St. Joseph's altar, teenagers, wrestling and jostling and pushing each other around while mom and dad were engaging in the gathering rite. Apparently not too worried about the fact that the St. Joseph's altar had turned into a romper room for the afternoon. It was absolutely incredible. I wanted to share a little of this. Remember, I just took it with an iPhone. Take a look at this.
Kumbaya.
Now keep in mind, this took place in the venerable old Church of the Assumption, an old German church from the late 1800s. It's so historic that the Minnesota Historical Society took it over at some point back in the, I don't know when, I guess the 60s, and thus saved it from the bulldozers and the Catholic reprovators of the 1970s. Thank God for that. But that creates this bizarre juxtaposition, what I was seeing there that day. It's just so bizarre with the statues, the high altars, the gorgeous works of art and so forth. And then this little neo-Catholic liturgical cocktail party going on in the middle of it all. It was positively Hitchcockian. It was so strange to see these two worlds. I just don't know what is going on anymore. I don't know what to make of this. I mean, even in pagan Europe, you walk into Sacré-Cœur in Paris or Westminster in London or St. Peter's in Rome, and there are signs all over the place. People are praying. Silence. This is a house of prayer. Silence. And then, of course, to keep the tourists in line, there are stern-looking officials running all over the place, making sure that folks can actually pray in the venerable old churches of Europe. It's sort of standard operating procedure. Now, Rob, maybe you could throw something up, more of this video, because I got some questions for the folks as we look at the video over my shoulder here. Look at this video, folks. How could anyone pray in such kindergarten bedlam? I didn't see anybody praying there, by the way, but I'm curious to know how would that even happen? What would that look like? And whose idea was it to turn our sacred places into social clubs with all the mystery and sacrality of a shopping mall or a McDonald's restaurant? Does anyone in this building appear to still believe that the supreme Godhead and the creator of the universe is reserved in that tabernacle, which is another piece that the Historical Society saved? Does anyone believe that God's there, that they're in the presence of God? I mean, if what we see in this video doesn't represent a new Catholic or a, terrible word, neo-Catholic attitude, I don't know what would. Remember how it was when we were kids? You remember how it was when you'd walk into church anytime during the week? First of all, usually they were still open before we got sophisticated and progressive. We used to leave the churches open. We used to be able to do that. Not anymore. But inside those churches, the peaceful atmosphere, the little red sanctuary lamp, remember? The candles, folks praying silently in the pews, old women maybe lighting votive candles for deceased husbands, all those beautiful old things that used to happen in the old church. It was the house of God, and no one, even a little child, lost sight of that. Catholics went into the house of God when I was young, and they shut their mouths and they acted like adults. So question, who's the demonic genius who walked into the houses of our church, the houses of God, of our church, of our youth, and said, okay, everybody, let's get this party rocking? Who is this guy? I mean, seriously, Rob, who is this guy?
I don't know.
Where is he? Is he still employed somewhere? Does he have horns and a tail? And you ever try going to confession in one of these places on a Saturday afternoon? It's incredible. It's like the theater of the absurd. You got a line of penitents, a few, praying and trying to do the usual thing that Catholics do before confession, examine their consciences, and then you have all these people running around, talking out loud, laughing, prancing back and forth in front of the tabernacle if there is still one. No genuflecting, no lowered voices. I memean, Rob, it's just so rude. Just regular manners have gone by the wayside. And why is it okay? Why would it be okay for me to pray? Or if, let's say you're praying or me praying and the other guy's just running around talking and jumping and paying no attention to that. Who does that? What in the world has gone wrong? I mean, try to behave this way in a synagogue or in a mosque or in a temple. Lots of luck. It's not going to happen. But in Catholic churches, you bet. Sure. Why not? We don't care. We got noise. We got hugging. We got chatting. We got it all. No respect for people trying to pray. No respect for the holy place. No respect for the Eucharist, of course. And why not? Isn't it obvious why this is all falling apart? It's because so very few Catholics still believe after 50 years of liturgical progress in the church. Liturgical renewal. What a joke. And this neo-Catholic attitude is obvious from top to bottom, from Vatican to pew, right down to the architecture of our own renewed churches. Rip out the rails. Tear out the altars. Put women in rock bands and choirs and dancers up in the sanctuary. Don't genuflect. We don't genuflect. In fact, rip out the kneelers, too. Catholics don't kneel in front of anybody anymore. Now, seriously, think about this. Doesn't this strike you as really strange that the kneelers have been ripped out of the houses of God in the Catholic Church? Just for a minute, forget about the arguments about Latin versus English and Ad Orientem and communion in the hand and altar girls and all the rest, guitar masses. Forget about all that for a second and think about just this. They tore out the kneelers in our churches, most of them. They tore out the communion rail. What could be more indicative of diabolical infiltration in the church than that? They've removed the places where we used to kneel down in the august presence of Almighty God. Again, whose idea was that? Why would anyone, especially a child, especially children, why would they retain belief in the real presence when this is how God is treated in the new and improved church, the neo-Catholic Church? Why? No wonder everybody's losing the faith. No wonder 80% of Catholics under the age of 50 don't even believe in the real presence anymore. We take a lot of flack for using this term neo-Catholic, folks. I think it was my friend Chris Ferrara who coined the term in the Remnant years ago. But what's often misunderstood about this is the fact that the term isn't meant to be an insult. The term is simply a way to describe the reality of what Catholics have become. It's almost a term of pity, in fact, since these poor folks, these neo-Catholics, have been robbed of their birthright. Their liturgy has been destroyed. The prayers that their fathers and mothers grew up saying and praying are gone. Their identity is gone. Everything that makes them Catholic has changed or is gone completely. Altars removed, the litany. Statues gone, smashed, communion rails torn out, priests in golf shirts, the old cassock gone, all the trappings, all the nuns, the traditional habits gone. Nuns are in pantsuits now. No, we're talking about neo-Catholics. The folks who have been so brainwashed that they cannot possibly see the revolution for what it is. But they're nevertheless induced, in order to be considered good Catholics, to consistently and constantly make excuses and justify the very things that they themselves would have condemned as un-Catholic just a few years earlier. The same things that would have horrified every pope and every saint in history. Whether it's guitar masses or dancing girls up in the sanctuary or communion passed out like Ritz crackers, you know how it looks nowadays. It's not Catholic, it's neo-Catholic. And so these poor, benighted neo-Catholics go on forever making excuses for that which is inexcusable. What they are, they're well-intentioned, but they're enablers of the revolution. They're water carriers. Inadvertently, they're water carriers of a revolution. And in fact, the fact that they're well-meaning only kind of makes it even more bizarre. I'm not accusing them of being malicious. Most of them are not. They're trying to be good Catholics. But they're like victims of a Soviet regime. After 50 years, you forget what it's like to be human. After 50 years of this, you forget what it's like to be Catholics. Now, if I had said, let's come up with an example. If I had said, say, 3 years ago that Pope Francis would go to Sweden 3 years hence to commemorate the 500th anniversary of the Protestant Revolt and to praise Martin Luther. Now, what do you think the neo-Catholics would have said? They would have blasted me as a hater who's probably a crypto-sedevacantist and definitely a very bad person. How dare you suggest something about our Pope? He would never do that, right? Right? Let's be honest. But when the Pope did exactly that back in October, just a few months ago, what did we hear from the neo-Catholics who said it could never happen? What did we hear? We heard crickets. We heard nothing. A few years ago, Francis was already talking about adopting the Casper proposal. Cardinal Walter Casper, is a heretic. There's no doubt in my mind of that. The Pope, right out of the gate, I was in St. Peter's, I heard him. He was in his first Wednesday address. He had already mentioned Cardinal Casper's new book. He promoted Cardinal Casper's book from the hall, from the apartments that he's no longer using, on the first Wednesday audience after he was made Pope. And they were already talking about changing the Church's teaching then, which now we know includes the undermining of Pope John Paul's Familiaris Consortio, the great traditional defense of family and marriage. They're going to undermine that. It's all about the impossibility of the Church allowing divorced and remarried Catholics to receive Holy Communion. So we saw this coming. We were there. We were in Rome. We were reporting on it. And we told our viewers that this was coming. And the neo-Catholic reaction, true to form, to attack us, to attack the messenger. The rad trads are at it again. It's never going to happen. Shut up, rad trads. That was the reaction. And that's exactly what the Pope is doing, whether we like it or not. That's what's going on. And he's doing it so obviously and so egregiously now that even high-ranking prelates such as Cardinal Raymond Burke and other cardinals and bishops are publicly demanding a clarification before launching their own public correction of the Holy Father, something which hasn't happened for centuries in the Church. That's how serious this is. Where are the neo-Catholics? And when I asked Cardinal Burke in my interview a few weeks ago, same question. I said, is this gearing up to become like the next Arian heresy? Could it be this serious? What's happening right now with Pope Francis and Amoris Laetitia in the Vatican and so forth? And you know what, Rob? Let's play that. We have a little clip of that. We'll play a little bit of a soundbite from that interview in which Cardinal Burke says, yes, this is exactly how serious it is. Let's just take a quick look. A number of high-ranking, high-profile pastors and academics and professors and so forth, both here and in Europe, signed a letter of support a few weeks ago in which they pointed out that as a result of the widespread confusion and disunity following the promulgation of Amoris, the Universal Church is now entering a gravely critical moment in her history that, according to them, shows alarming similarities with the great Arian crisis of the 4th century. And I'm curious to know, do you agree? Do you think this has the potential to escalate into something similar to the Arian crisis?
Well, it does in this sense that as long as a confusion spreads more and more about a fundamental truth of the faith. Now, in the case of the Arian crisis, it had to do with the two natures in the one person of our Lord Jesus Christ. But here we're dealing also with a very fundamental truth, two fundamental truths really, the truth about holy matrimony and the truth about the Holy Eucharist. And if this confusion doesn't stop, we will have a situation where you have within the Church large bodies of people who don't believe the Catholic faith, as, for instance, St. Ambrose encountered when he became Bishop of Milan. And so, no, it's a serious matter, and I don't think that they're being extreme by making that observation. I don't think they're being extreme at all.
And then again, the neo-Catholic reaction, and I've heard this with my own ears. Well, obviously, Cardinal Burke is a troublemaker. You know what he needs to do? You know what Cardinal Burke needs to do? He needs to pray and obey is what he needs to do. That cat is causing scandal. I've heard this with my own ears. They're taking out cardinals, high-ranking cardinals. I used to say to the traditional Catholics, who are you, little lay people? How dare you suggest that there could be something wrong all the way to the executive office of the Catholic Church? Now you have cardinals, high-ranking cardinals saying, you know what? There's something wrong. And the neo-Catholic reaction? Well, let's just attack them. Just keep attacking everyone who defends the faith until there is no faith left to defend, apparently. Burke is causing the scandal? Are you serious, neo-Catholics? Really? I don't know. As 2017 dawns, I know we were talking earlier about it being foreboding, but I want to make a prediction. I guess that's what one does on New Year's. I want to make a prediction, and it's not a happy one. The Church of Pope Francis the Merciful will take steps to lift restrictions on the reception of sacraments for those who are in the homosexual lifestyle, so-called gay unions. Never going to happen? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It's going to happen. They've already said they're gearing up to talk about this at the next synod, and you know what direction that's going to go. The conservatives, the traditionalists, the Cardinal Burkes won't even be invited to the synod so that they can ramrod this through too. And the question is, how long are you going to go along with this? How much more are you going to take? How about the canonization of Martin Luther? Are you comfortable with St. Martin Luther? You better be, because that's coming too. The new synodal church, the decentralization of the church, are you ready for that? How about women cardinals? That's coming. What's it going to take? Now, these aren't ex-cathedra teachings, mind you. This is not infallible teachings of the church. Obviously, this is a game they're playing. It's part of the great facade. It's just a new orientation. The synodal church. What is that? There's no precedent for that. The synodal church, the church of accompaniment. What is that? There's no precedent for that. There's no theological precedent for any of this thing. They're creating more of the great facade. And Catholics, faithful Catholics, can't just sit back and do nothing in the face of this. This is wrong. Now, thankfully, there are people who are beginning to wake up. Lots of people are beginning to wake up. I don't know, Rob, if you've been paying attention to EWTN, Raymond Arroyo, and guys like that. Hats off to them. They're doing great work. They realize the jig is up. They used to be what I would consider neo-Catholic central. Now they sound like there's something, they're lifting their things right out of the remnant. I'm not saying they are, by the way, but it sounds that way. And I'm glad, I'm happy for it. So people are waking up. People, average pew sitters, have had enough. Even some really unlikely voices are speaking out. Celebrities such as Bill Murray, the comedian Bill Murray from the old Saturday Night Live. Jimmy Fallon has talked about what happened to the Catholic Church, what happened to the Latin Mass being a disaster. They're saying some really great things. They've had enough of the hippie takeover of the Catholic Church. They know this is not the Holy Spirit. Something else is very political is up right now. And to that end, I wanted to quote for you Robert Hergus. He's a staffer for the Reporter of the Chicago Sun-Times, and he's just written a really interesting new book called Genuflections, Famous Folks Talk About Growing Up Catholic. And it features all sorts of famous people, musicians, politicians, actors, talking about what the Catholic faith means to them, and in some cases, what the destruction of the old Mass meant to them. And I think it's riveting reading. So, for my expert theologian tonight, I'm going to be citing Bianca Jagger, the wife of the famous frontman for the Rolling Stones, Mick Jagger. Now, she's quoted heavily in this book, and she talks about how the revolution in the church impacted her, and I think it's very interesting. Now, I know our neo-Catholic friends are going to jump in and say, oh, sure, a hippie icon lecturing us about the evils of the new Mass. That's great, rad trad. But you know what? Bianca Jagger and millions like her were impacted and even devastated by the very revolution that our neo-Catholic friends now defend as the work of the Holy Spirit, and I think their testimony is relevant for that reason. You can cut the irony of all this with a knife now. You've got Pope Francis describing the war on the Latin as the universal language of the Mass. He calls it, quote, really a courageous move to get people closer to God, end quote. But he's saying that, and you get these cultural icons who actually lived through that liturgical revolution, and they're not saying that. They're saying just the opposite. that after the Mass was destroyed, a lot of these young Catholics in the 60s and 70s saw a church that was trying to get hip and failing miserably, and they just took off. Whole generations of Catholics just took off. They said, okay, we'll see ya. And they went off, and they got into sex, and they got into drugs, and whatever else. Eastern mysticism became huge at that point, trying to replace the mystery and the meaning of what they'd known as Catholics when they were very young. So, quote, when Pope Paul VI, now okay, neo-Catholics, you got this. This is Bianca Jagger speaking. She writes, quote, when Pope Paul VI and the Second Vatican Council introduced the service in the vernacular in 1965, the Latin Mass was almost eliminated. So we lost a Mass in a universal language and a solemn high tradition of the Catholic Church. I disagree with those, says Jagger, who think that Latin Mass is elitist. We used to be able to go anywhere in the world, even where we didn't speak the language, and the Catholic Mass would be familiar and always the same. So, says Jagger, I continue to support the idea that we should revive the Latin Mass all over the world, end quote. It's just incredible. And then Bianca Jagger goes on to recount an incident which was sort of amusing. She talks about when she and Andy Warhol, of all people, another Catholic, interviewed Sting, the front man for Sting. Rob, help me out. The Police. Front man for the Police. They interviewed him back in 1983. And the subject of the old Latin Mass came up once again. And Bianca says, I prefer Mass in Latin to English, she says. And then jumps in Andy Warhol, I do too. At which point, Sting chimes in saying, me too. The mystery in it. It's all gone now. What's been gained from taking all that away? Now the neo-Catholics will jump in and say, well, participation. We can participate in the liturgy now. You think that the millions and millions of Catholics down through the ages who lived and breathed their faith and went to the Latin Mass every day for millennia were not participating in the Mass? Really? You with your limited, some might even say dumbed down Catholic education. I know my Catholic education was dumbed down because they were hard at it by this time I was in grade school and high school in the 70s and 80s, and it was dumbed down. So you think you with your dumbed down Catholic education, you've somehow discerned that the Mass of our fathers that formed the faith and the souls of the greatest saints in history did not allow for adequate participation? Really? The saints needed to what? Hold hands? Maybe do more hugging at Mass? Take God in their hands to fully participate? Is that actually your argument? Are you sure about that? Because it sort of sounds like self-loathing Catholicism to say that for 1,965 years, the Catholic Church, the great saints, the great liturgists, all had it wrong. They were all wrong. It wasn't until 1965 that they started getting it right. Are you serious? Oh, why would you say that and still remain a Catholic? This is basically the argumentation of Martin Luther. Everybody had it wrong for 1,500 years until Martin Luther came along. Well, now the neo-Catholics are saying everybody had it wrong for 1,965 years until Annibale Bugnini came along and finally got the Mass so we could participate. It just seems ridiculous to me. Who benefited from this glorious revolution of Vatican II? I mean, look at the statistics. Look at the loss of faith. Look at the priest vocations crisis that we have going today. The church closings all over the place. The nuns disappeared. I remember the nuns. Where are they now? Outside of traditionalist enclaves. The seminaries were infiltrated by modernists, which resulted in a massive sex clerical scandal in the priesthood. So again, who benefited from all this? Why are we defending all of this? What are we talking about here? Wake up. I'm going to close with a quotation from back in 1982, a magazine called Today magazine. It's their April issue in which Anne Muggeridge, or at that time she was Anne Roach Muggeridge, very famous Catholic author, she wrote an article called The Way It Used to Be. Quote, there is not the tiniest part of this Catholic fabric of 20 years ago that has not changed beyond recognition. Catholicism is like a city destroyed by war. Most of its inhabitants have fled, and those who remain are picking through the ruins, trying to salvage things not too battered to be useful. I was never so shocked in my life as when my father told me several years ago, before he died, that he was no longer going to Mass. I don't believe you, I said. It can't be true. Blessed God, why not? Well, my girl, my father replied haltingly, it's the changes to the Mass. I just don't feel there's anything happening up there anymore. I try, but I can't. My father, whose faith through the poor times and through my mother's agonizing death had remained so innocent, cheerful, and trusting, who until then would rather have died than miss Mass intentionally, who took Holy Communion so seriously that he wouldn't have received if he had so much as laughed at a blasphemous joke in the mill. Now for him, the miracle had departed. They had taken away his Lord, and he didn't know where they had laid him. Since the Mass was, in Aquinas' words, the central pillar of the Church, it was the first target of the revolution that accompanied the Second Vatican Council. It was the first matter to be discussed at the Council, and radical changes were introduced into it even before the Council ended. The liturgical changes devised by ideologues and enforced by dupes at one stroke altered the face and mood of Catholicism unrecognizably. The cult was kicked down, and the culture fell with it. Now that the heart is broken, Catholicism is an act of will, performed out of honor and out of love. But it is love among the ruins. One keeps on going to the gutted masses, with their antic priests, manufactured excitement, and cafeteria casualness at Holy Communion, and one closes one's eyes and prays the desperate prayer of the agnostic believer. Lord, I believe. Help thou my unbelief. So ends the quotation from Anne Roach from her article. Friends, this has gone on for a long time, and I would say as 2017 starts out, it's gone on for long enough. We traditional Catholics, so-called traditional Catholics, haven't changed anything. We're not holier than you. We're not smarter. We've just opened our eyes. And now we're trying to just live our faith among these ruins that Anne Roach talked about, trying to live the faith of our fathers and to hand it down to our children as it was handed down to us. That's our sacred duty as Catholics before God and before our children. And we're not going anywhere, by the way. This is our church, and it's under siege right now. The fort has been betrayed, but the fort is still ours, and we're still in it. We're not going to start our own church. That's not how it works for Catholics. We're not going into schism. We're going to stay right here, and eventually, whether it's us or our children or our grandchildren, we Catholics are going to take back our buildings. That's the New Year's resolution for us here at the Remnant Underground. There's only one church, and when it's been infiltrated, faithful Catholics stay on and fight to get it back. And that's exactly what Cardinal Burke is trying to do right now, and that's exactly what we're going to do from now on until the job is done. Join us. Stop fighting against the resistance. Join us. We need your help. Join Cardinal Burke. Let's do the right thing. God expects it of us. Our forefathers demand it of us, and history waits for us to do it. So let us do it. I'm Michael Matt for the Remnant Underground, and we'll see you next week.